The Commander Blacks of the Krillian Empire had what you might generously call a routine day planned. Wake up, consume nutritional paste, terrorize a few primitive species, file the paperwork. Standard Tuesday stuff for a galactic overlord with delusions of competence. The humans? Oh, they barely registered on his threat assessment scale. Somewhere between mildly interesting houseplant and pet that makes amusing noises. Cute little bipeds from that backwater system who'd somehow stumbled into faster-than-light travel and immediately started apologizing for existing. They sent fruit baskets to the Galactic Council. Fruit baskets. Who does that? Sir, we've completed the specimen collection from Human Colony Designation Zeta-7, reported his subordinate, a particularly ugly example of Krillian efficiency named Lieutenant Grox. Blacks didn't even look up from his morning violence reports. How many? 47 juveniles, ages 6 to 12 standard years, perfect for the Research Division's psychological experimentation protocols. Now, here's where things get interesting. Because at that exact moment, halfway across the galaxy, Captain Rex Stone was having his morning coffee aboard the Earth diplomatic vessel Olive Branch. Rex was the kind of human who looked like he'd been carved from granite by someone who really had it out for granite. Square jaw, steel eyes, and the sort of calm demeanor that should have been a warning sign to anyone with half a functioning brain stem. His communication officer, a nervous young woman named Lieutenant Torres, approached with the kind of expression you'd wear to inform someone their puppy had been turned into soup. Captain, we've received word from Colony Zeta-7. The Krillians, they took children, sir, and 47 of them. Rex Stone set down his coffee cup with the precision of a man placing a chess piece. The cup didn't rattle. It should have rattled. Normal cups rattle when you're fighting the urge to turn an entire star system into decorative space dust. How long ago? His voice carried the kind of calm that precedes hurricanes. 6 hours, sir. They're already beyond our sensor range. Rex stood up, straightened his uniform, and smiled. It was the sort of smile that would make a shark reconsider its career choices. Get me Admiral Volt on the priority channel, and Torres. Activate Protocol 7. Sir, Protocol 7 is... I know what it is, Lieutenant. Back on the Krillian flagship, Commander Blacks was feeling rather pleased with himself. The humans hadn't even filed a formal complaint yet. Probably too busy being adorably inferior to notice their offspring were missing. He'd seen their diplomatic responses before, with polite notes expressing concern and disappointment. Sometimes they included those fruit baskets, as if citrus could solve intergalactic incidents. What Commander Blacks didn't know was that, while he was congratulating himself on his competence, every human military asset within 50 light years had just received a very simple message. The children are gone. You know what to do. And, oh, did they ever know what to do? The Galactic Council chamber looked like what would happen if someone let a committee of colorblind architects design a building while blindfolded and heavily sedated. Ambassador Quirk, a slug-like creature from the Mollusk Federation, nervously adjusted his translator as Commander Blacks strutted to the central podium. 16 delegates. Blacks began, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who'd never encountered actual consequences. I bring news of a minor compliance action against the human settlement in Sector Zeta. General Thorne, humanity's military representative, sat motionless in the human delegation section. If you didn't know better, you might think he was asleep. If you did know better, you'd recognize the posture of a predator calculating angles of attack. Minor compliance action. Ambassador Quirk's tentacles twitched nervously. The reports suggest you removed 47 human juveniles for experimental purposes. Blacks waved a dismissive claw. Specimens, Ambassador. We're conducting valuable research on primitive cognitive development. The humans should be grateful we're advancing scientific knowledge using their progeny. The chamber buzzed with what passed for conversation among beings who communicated through everything from pheromones to interpretive tentacle dancing. Most seemed to view this as a minor bureaucratic hiccup. After all, humans were the galaxy's designated nice guys. In their soul. Carteres. They brought cookies to peace negotiations and had never so much as raised their voice during 3 years of council membership. That's when Captain Rex Stone's image materialized via holographic transmission. His face filled the central display, and something in his expression made several delegates instinctively scoot backward. "Commander Blacks," Rex said, his tone carrying all the warmth of deep space, "I'm calling to discuss the misunderstanding regarding our citizens." Blacks actually laughed. He laughed. "Ah, Captain Stone, have you prepared another one of your charming formal protests? Perhaps with a nice selection of tropical fruits?" "No fruit today, Commander. Just a simple request for the immediate return of our children." Request denied. The specimens are now property of the Krillian Empire for scientific advancement. Rex nodded slowly, as if Blacks had just confirmed something deeply important. "I see. And you're certain this is your final position?" "Absolutely. What are you primitives going to do about it? File another complaint?" Rex Stone smiled. It was the same smile he'd worn earlier, the one that suggested several species were about to have a very educational day. "Actually, Commander, we've prepared something a bit more comprehensive than usual. You have 48 hours to return our children unharmed to Colony Zeta 7. "Or what?" Black sneered. "Or we'll come get them ourselves." The transmission cut out, leaving the council chamber in confused silence. Several delegates looked around uncertainly, as if waiting for the punchline to an elaborate joke. Ambassador Quirk cleared his throat, or the slug equivalent thereof. "Perhaps we should consider mediation. The humans have been model citizens of the galactic community. Commander Blacks was having none of it. In model citizens. They're barely evolved primates. Their entire military consists of ceremonial parade ships and diplomatic vessels. I've seen their fleet roster, Ambassador. They have exactly 12 combat-rated vessels in their entire space force." General Thorne finally spoke, his voice carrying the gravitas of distant thunder. "Commander, I feel obligated to point out that those 12 vessels represent our diplomatic escort fleet." "Escort fleet?" For our ambassadors. We wouldn't want anything to happen to our diplomats while they're conducting peaceful negotiations." The subtle emphasis on peaceful hung in the air like the scent of ozone before a lightning strike. "How many ships do you have total?" Ambassador Quirk asked, his slug features creased with what might have been worry. General Thorne considered the question with the seriousness of someone discussing the weather. "Well, Ambassador, that depends on how you define ship. Are we counting active fleet vessels, reserve mothball fleets, colonial defense platforms, merchant marine auxiliary units, or just the ones we admit to owning?" The chamber had gone very, very quiet. Dr. Maya Flux had the sort of reputation that made other weapons scientists check their insurance policies and update their wills. She stood barely 5 feet tall, wore lab coats covered in suspicious stains, and had the unsettling habit of humming show tunes while designing increasingly creative ways to turn matter into energy. "So they took the kids, huh?" she said, not looking up from her workbench where something was either being assembled or preparing to achieve sentience. "How many pieces do you want the Krillian fleet returned in?" "I'm thinking somewhere between confetti and component atoms." Colonel Jack Hammer leaned against the doorframe of her lab, grinning like a man who'd just been told Christmas had been moved up to today. Jack was the kind of special forces officer who considered impossible odds to be more of a suggestion than an actual obstacle. "Now, Maya, let's be reasonable. We're civilized people here." "Reasonably civilized," she corrected, adding what looked like a miniature black hole to her current project. "There's a difference. Admiral Volt wants a proportional response." Maya paused in her work and slowly turned to face him. "Proportional to what exactly? The crime or our capacity for creative vengeance?" "The crime, obviously." "Oh, well, in that case I'll need to requisition about 47 stellar detonators and a really big slingshot. Meanwhile, 3 decks up in the command center of the orbital station designated totally just a weather monitoring platform. We promise." Admiral Zara Volt was orchestrating what historians would later describe as either humanity's finest hour or its most terrifying coffee break. "Status report," she commanded, a voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent 30 years making the impossible look routine. Ghost Fleet 7 through 15 are moving into position, reported her operations officer. Stealth frigates are beginning long-range reconnaissance of Krillian space. And the Independence Day package? Ready for deployment on your order, Admiral. Dr. Flux wants to know if you'd prefer the surgical strike option or the object lesson for future generations configuration. Admiral Volt considered this with the seriousness it deserved. Let's start with surgical and see how cooperative they are. We can always upgrade to object lesson if they're feeling stubborn. The truth about humanity's military capability was one of the galaxy's best-kept secrets, mostly because no one had bothered to ask the right questions. When humans had joined the galactic community, they'd submitted fleet rosters and defensive capability reports, just like everyone else. They'd been completely honest about their 12 active diplomatic vessels, their 15 colonial defense platforms, and their modest merchant marine. What they hadn't mentioned was the Ghost Fleet program, or the fact that every weather monitoring station in human space was actually a fortress that could glass a planet, or that their merchant vessels carried enough firepower to sterilize star systems. It wasn't lying exactly. It was more like selective transparency with a creative interpretation of active military assets. How long until our diplomatic ships are in position? Admiral Volt asked. ETA 17 hours. Admiral. Should I inform Captain Stone that his backup is en route? No need, Commander. Rex is probably having too much fun playing the reasonable diplomat. Let's not spoil his performance. Back in Dr. Flux's lab, Colonel Hammer was reviewing target assessments with the enthusiasm of a kid planning the world's most destructive snowball fight. So the Krillian home fleet has approximately 400 vessels, ranging from patrol craft to dreadnoughts. Their defensive stations number in the dozens, and their planetary shields are rated for Class 5 bombardment. Maya looked up from her work with the expression of someone who'd just been told they were overqualified for a job. That's it? Jack, I built bigger challenges for my doctoral thesis. Are you sure they're not just elaborate decoys? Nope. That's their entire military-industrial complex. She returned to her work, shaking her head, and they thought taking our kids was a good idea. You know what? I'm almost insulted by how easy this is going to be. The 48-hour countdown was less about giving the Krillians time to comply and more about allowing human forces to get into position for what military strategists would later classify as overwhelming overkill with a side of educational violence. Because when you take human children, you don't just face human military might, you face human parents. And parents, as any species with a functioning survival instinct should know, are capable of things that make professional soldiers wake up in cold sweats. The first sign that Commander Blax had made a career-limiting decision came when his long-range sensors detected absolutely nothing. Not the absence of ships, mind you, but the kind of nothing that happens when something very large and very stealthy decides it doesn't want to be seen. Sir, Lieutenant Grox reported, his voice carrying a tremor that suggested his survival instincts were more developed than his commanding officers. We're detecting gravitational anomalies throughout our patrol sectors. Anomalies. Blax was busy reviewing the psychological torture schedules for their human specimens and couldn't be bothered with technical details. Yes, sir. Space appears to be bending in 17 different locations. Our physics department suggests this is impossible unless there are massive objects we can't detect. Impossible is just another word for equipment malfunction. Lieutenant, I run a diagnostic. What Blax didn't realize was that impossible was also another word for human engineering, and at that precise moment, 17 human vessels were decloaking in perfect formation around his fleet. The lead ship was Captain Rex Stone's diplomatic vessel, the Olive Branch, which had somehow transformed from a peaceful negotiation platform into something that looked like it could bite chunks out of small moons. Rex's face appeared on every Krillian communication screen simultaneously, which should have been technically impossible but apparently fell under humanity's definition of diplomatic courtesy. Commander Blax, Rex said, his tone carrying all the warmth of an Arctic breeze, we've come to discuss the return of our children. Black stared at the display showing 17 ships that definitely hadn't been there moments before. Ships that were somehow jamming his sensors while broadcasting to his entire fleet. Ships that made his dreadnoughts look like decorative paperweights. How? Where did you come from? We've been here the whole time, Commander. We were just being polite and staying invisible until we were invited to the conversation. This is impossible. Our intelligence reports showed you have only 12 military vessels. Rex smiled, and somewhere in the background, soft classical music began playing. Oh, those. Yes, those are our diplomatic escort ships. Lovely little craft, aren't they? Perfect for formal occasions and ceremonial displays. Then what are these? Blax gestured frantically at his tactical display, which was now showing human ships appearing throughout Krillian space like flowers blooming in a garden designed by particularly vindictive gardeners. These? These are what we use when diplomacy isn't working. We call them negotiations facilitators. The human fleet had materialized with surgical precision at every critical point in Krillian space. Military installations, supply depots, communication relays, and what appeared to be Commander Blax's personal summer retreat on Krillian Prime. You see, Commander, we've been conducting what you might call cultural exchange programs throughout the galaxy for the past 3 years. Our anthropologists have been absolutely fascinated by military architecture, defensive strategies, and particularly the layout of prison facilities. Lieutenant Grox made a sound that might have been whimpering. Sir, they've been mapping our entire defense network. For purely academic purposes, of course, Rex continued, his smile never wavering. We're very curious about how different species approach the concept of impregnable fortifications. It's been quite educational. The tactical display now showed the human fleet positioned with mathematical precision to disable every single Krillian military asset simultaneously. Not destroy, mind you. Disable. There's a subtle but important difference between complete military annihilation and making your weapons systems take a really long nap. Now then, Rex said, settling back in his command chair with the casual air of someone discussing weekend plans, about our children. Our intelligence suggests they're being held in Research Facility Omega-9, approximately 47 minutes from your current position. How could you possibly know that? Oh, we've been tracking them since the moment they were taken. Each of our children carries a standard health monitoring implant. Very advanced technology. Completely undetectable by conventional sensors, but quite handy for concerned parents. Commander Blax felt the first stirrings of what experienced military commanders recognize as the moment when you realize you've made a spectacular miscalculation. You've been tracking them? Of course. We're responsible parents, Commander. We know where our children are at all times. Rex paused, consulting something off-screen. Speaking of which, it appears little Tommy Morrison is running a slight fever. I do hope your research facility has adequate medical care. The classical music in the background shifted to something that sounded suspiciously like a funeral march. What happened next would be studied in military academies across the galaxy as either the most perfectly executed rescue operation in recorded history or the most polite apocalypse ever witnessed. The human fleet didn't attack so much as it simply arrived. One moment, Research Facility Omega-9 was a secure Krillian installation. The next moment it was surrounded by ships that made the concept of resistance seem quaint and outdated. Colonel Jack Hammer's voice crackled over the facility's communication system with the cheerful tone of someone announcing a surprise birthday party. Good morning, Facility Omega-9. This is Colonel Hammer of the Human Special Operations Division. We're here for the children. The facility commander, a particularly nervous Krillian named Dr. Slex, stared at his screens in disbelief. The humans hadn't destroyed his defenses, they'd simply turned them off. Every shield generator, every weapon system, every security lock had simultaneously decided to take an extended coffee break. How did you disable your security? Oh, that's the fascinating thing about studying different species technology for 3 years. You learn all sorts of interesting things about design flaws and backdoor access protocols. Dr. Meyerflux's voice joined the conversation, carrying the enthusiasm of someone describing their favorite hobby. We particularly enjoyed reverse engineering your quantum encryption algorithms. Very creative use of subatomic particle rotation. Completely inadequate for actual security purposes, but artistically quite impressive. You can't just... Actually, we can, Colonel Hammer interrupted. You see, you've presented us with what we like to call a parental motivation scenario. Are you familiar with the concept of parental motivation, Doctor? Dr. Slicks wasn't, but he was about to get a comprehensive education. When you threaten human children, you don't just face human military forces. You face human parents. And parents, Doctor, are capable of things that make our professional military look restrained and reasonable. At that moment, the facility's blast doors simply opened, all of them, simultaneously. The locks didn't break or explode. They politely stepped aside, as if recognizing superior authority. Human soldiers materialized in the corridors with the casual efficiency of people who did this sort of thing between lunch and afternoon tea. They moved with the precision of a surgical strike and the determination of parents picking up their children from an especially problematic daycare. Now, Colonel Hammer continued, his voice maintaining its friendly tone, we're going to collect our children and escort them home. You're welcome to observe this process, but please don't interfere. We're being very polite about this, and we'd prefer not to demonstrate our less diplomatic options. The 47 human children were found in holding cells that had been designed for psychological experimentation. They were frightened but unharmed, which was fortunate for the continued existence of Krillian civilization. Captain Rex Stone's voice joined the communication as the children were safely evacuated. Dr. Slicks, I want you to understand something very important. We found our children scared but unharmed. This is the only reason your facility still exists in a state that could generously be called intact. Meanwhile, throughout Krillian space, similar conversations were taking place. Every military installation, every government facility, every communications relay was simultaneously visited by polite human representatives who explained, with infinite patience, exactly why taking human children had been a suboptimal strategic decision. Commander Blacks found himself face to face with Admiral Zara Volt, whose ship had somehow materialized directly beside his flagship despite every law of physics he thought he understood. Commander, Admiral Volt said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent decades making impossible things happen before breakfast. Let's discuss the concept of proportional response. A proportional response. Yes. You took 47 of our children. A proportional response would involve US taking 47 of your planets. However, we're feeling generous today, so we'll settle for a complete restructuring of your government, full reparations to the affected families, and a formal apology that will be broadcast to every species in the galaxy. Blacks's tactical officer whispered urgently in his ear. Sir, they've disabled every military asset we have. Our entire fleet is currently operating on what they're calling provisional life support. They could space us all with a single command. But that would be disproportionate, Admiral Volt continued, as if overhearing the whispered conversation. We prefer to think of ourselves as reasonable people. The children are safe, no permanent harm was done, and you've all learned a valuable lesson about the importance of not threatening human families. The lesson, as it turned out, was about to become galactic law. 6 months later, the Galactic Council had enacted what became known as the Don't Touch Human Kids Resolution, though the official title was considerably more diplomatic and ran to several hundred pages of legal text that essentially boiled down to seriously, just don't. Commander Blacks, now former Commander Blacks, had found new employment as a junior sanitation engineer on a mining station in a system so remote that it didn't even have a name, just a catalog number. His request for this position had been entirely voluntary, in the sense that volunteering to disappear quietly was infinitely preferable to remaining visible to human attention. Captain Rex Stone sat in the same chair aboard the Olive Branch, sipping the same coffee, looking exactly as calm and reasonable as he had before the incident. The only change was that diplomatic pouches now regularly arrived containing crayon drawings from 47 children who'd learned that their Uncle Rex was the sort of person who'd move heaven and earth to bring them home. Captain, Lieutenant Torres reported, Approaching with the day's communication logs, we've received another fruit basket from the Mollusk Federation. Ambassador Quirk included a note thanking us for our measured response to the Krillian situation. Rex smiled, the same shark-like expression that had become his trademark. Measured response. I like that. Make sure to send a thank you note. Perhaps include some of those cookies from the bakery on Colony Zeta 7. In her lab, Dr. Maya Flux was working on what she cheerfully described as household improvements, which had the engineering corps slightly nervous but the diplomatic corps absolutely delighted. After all, nothing said peaceful intentions, quite like having weapons that could disassemble matter at the subatomic level while maintaining the aesthetic appeal of kitchen appliances. Maya, Colonel Hammer asked, watching her install what appeared to be a doomsday device disguised as a coffee machine. What exactly does that thing do? Makes excellent espresso and can disable quantum encryption across 17 different frequency bands. I call it the Caffeinator 3000. And the military applications? Well, if someone tries to interfere with coffee time, they might find their communication systems experiencing sudden clarity issues. Very technical stuff. You probably wouldn't understand. The truth was, the galaxy had learned something important about humanity. They'd discovered that the species they'd dismissed as harmlessly primitive were actually terrifyingly competent, but had been choosing to be nice about it. Ambassador Quirk had summed it up best during a closed session of the Galactic Council. They'd been playing with toy soldiers while sitting on enough firepower to rearrange star systems, and they did this because they thought it was polite. General Thorne, when asked about humanity's actual military capabilities, had simply smiled and suggested that some questions were better left unanswered. Let's just say that our diplomatic corps represents our peaceful intentions, not our limitations. The most significant change, however, was in how other species interacted with human colonies. Suddenly, human settlements found themselves the recipients of incredibly generous trade agreements, cultural exchange programs, and what could only be described as really good neighborly behavior. It wasn't fear, exactly. It was more like the kind of respect you show to someone who's demonstrated that their capacity for violence is exceeded only by their commitment to reasonable solutions. The 47 children from Colony Zeta 7 had become something of galactic celebrities, not because of what happened to them, but because of what didn't happen to their kidnappers. They were living proof that humanity's definition of proportional response included factors like no permanent harm done and educational value for future generations. Commander Blacks, now Sanitation Engineer Blacks, had plenty of time to reflect on this while cleaning waste recycling systems in the Outer Rim. His supervisor, a remarkably patient individual named Fred, had explained it best. You picked a fight with someone's kids, Blacks. You're lucky they left you alive to learn from the experience. And throughout the galaxy, a new understanding emerged. Humans were still the species that brought fruit baskets to diplomatic meetings and sent thank you notes for minor courtesies. But they were also the species that could make entire fleets disappear and reappear at will, could turn military installations into voluntary retirement facilities, and could make the impossible look like a casual afternoon project. The message was clear: be nice to human children, and humans would continue being the galaxy's most pleasant neighbors. But if you ever thought about harming those children, well, as Captain Rex Stone often said in his diplomatic briefings, we're reasonable people. We believe in proportional responses, measured reactions, and peaceful solutions. We also believe in making sure everyone understands what those terms actually mean. And across the galaxy, everyone understood perfectly.